Welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. This is a big, momentous day for me. For 4 years, I've been doing this podcast now for over 6 years, but for 4 years, I have worn wigs on every single podcast. And the reason is because I was doing an experimental rheumatoid arthritis drug. My hair all fell out. When it came back, it was nothing but just little kinks around on top of my head. I didn't hide that I was wearing wigs. As you know, if you watch this show, I wore different ones on every single episode. But today is my stepping out day. And I want the freedom of being able to choose, not what I have to hide. And so today is my stepping out day. Now I want to tell you about why I chose today. Today, I chose today because of my guest. My guest, even though she lives so far away in South Africa, I knew immediately when I was introduced to her and I began to read about her that Alison is probably one of the most safe places you can imagine. She stands naked and invites us to stand naked as we learn about ourselves and each other, and that we are way more alike than we are different. So please welcome to my podcast, Alison. Alison, oh my goodness, I don't even know how to pronounce your last name.
It's Weihe, like Weihe, a meaningful life.
Weihe. I'm glad I didn't try and pronounce it because I would have pronounced it completely different. Alison, welcome, Alison Weihe. So I know as you listen to this, all of you are going to want to know more about Alison. So we're going to include at the end of the podcast, as usual, where you can find her website, any other places, links to her book on Amazon, because when we finish this, you're going to be like, I want to stay connected with this magnificent woman. Alison, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mary.
We know, even though we have only now talked 5 minutes before the show started, we already know that you and I are kindred sisters from the depth of heart. Yeah. I've been to South Africa. I have some idea of the life that you've lived because, as you so eloquently pointed out to me before we started, you walked this path. It was your path to make a decision to craft a meaningful life. Mine began at age 50, yours began at age 52. Let's start our listeners right there. Tell us, what happened at age 52 that turned the rudder of your ship?
At age 52, I was on my knees. I'd battled some shame when I was younger, when I was aged 30. When I was a political activist for almost 20 years. And I felt like I'd let down some incredible people and an organization that allowed me to become part of their family. And so on the back of that shame that I'd kind of just buried, and it wasn't until I really started writing my book that I started owning my story and stepping through that shame. But on the back of that shame came another shame at age 52. When after I'd been a political activist, then I was an entrepreneur. And halfway through our journey, on our entrepreneurial journey, we'd won awards, we'd been featured on radio, on television, and in magazines. And we discovered that our trusted bookkeeper of 12 years, who'd been with us she'd been with us 8 years, but 12 years into our journey, had been defrauding us to the extent of more than $1.2 million in today's currency. And so there we were, this ex-political activist, an ex-technical trade genius, but none of us with a formal business background, and we had egg on our face, just like everybody said. And so we had to walk a journey of rebuilding the company, rebuilding staff morale, rebuilding our marriage, and rebuilding ourselves. But that fraud became my greatest gift. My greatest gift. Because on my knees, a bit like your journey that I read about, Mary, on my knees, I slunk into that gym, never having been in a gym before, in my big, baggy tracksuit, having battled emotional eating for lots of reasons, which I can go into later, big, small, flirting dangerously on the fringes of anorexia, ballooning up again. And I stepped into that gym. I couldn't look in the mirror. I couldn't look anywhere. And for an entire year, I moaned and whinged and whined in deep victim. And then something shifted. And that's why it was so incredible reading about your story, because you spoke about going into your body beyond your head. And I had been a walking disassociated head. I was so disassociated from my body. I had no connection to my body. And it took the first year for something to shift. And then I started running, and then I started swimming, and then I started running regular 21K races, and I started Pilates, and I started yoga, and I started reformer, and I started weights. And I literally became a different person. And where the really healing happened was that I changed not just the shape of my body, I changed the shape of my soul. Because I have not weighed myself once in 8 long years. Not once. I have no clue what I weigh. I just know that I feel strong inside and that I'm crafting a meaningful life through living in my spirit and allowing my spirit to be the voice, the temple for the voice that God has given me. And even in my 60s, I now am living a life of such deep intention, doing the work I'm doing with my business partner, Jabuzwani, and many others, doing collaborative summits in South Africa. And I'm involved in philanthropy and different things. And I didn't think my voice mattered. I didn't think my voice mattered. But after telling my story and publishing my book in August last year, it got featured in 12 global publications. And then I realized that my story does matter. But what I realized above all is that I'm just the messenger. I think that has been my greatest learning.
Well, we're going to try and dissect all of that magnificent story you just told. And I mean, the first thing, there's so many things that came to me, Alison, while you were talking, and how aligned our lives have been across the planet. Mm-hmm. And when you said, it's been 8 years since I stepped on the scale, and I have no idea how much I weigh. The thought that came to me was, I do know how much you weigh. I know, and so do you. And what you weigh is the perfect amount for you. Whatever it is, it's the perfect amount for you. And I love that you have stepped into that acceptance, because truly that's what it is. It's not what the scale says or what some BMI chart says. It's what's perfect for you. And that you are living a life of excellence every single day. All right, so let's try and open up some of those things. Let's go back to when you first made that decision to go into the gym. What were some of the fears that you had to cross through? You didn't walk around them anymore. You crossed through. What were some of the fears you crossed through as you made those first steps? Actually, you said a year of going to the gym. Yeah, before things began to shift.
Yeah. I think what I had to navigate were the voices that had plagued me my entire life, which is, what will people think? My whole life had been consumed with what will people think. And even though I'd become a political activist against all odds, I was quiet, I was shy, I was invisible. I wasn't at the front line of the marches. I was quietly making a difference in the anti-apartheid movement. But I wanted to change the world, but I wanted to stay invisible. And so in that journey of confronting who I was meant to be, became my own long walk to freedom. Because I had to get over those voices. Because I had nowhere else to go. I was on my knees. I'd lived through deep shame when I was 30 and suicidal. And now I was living in shame again. And from that shame and that brokenness, I had to get up every day and go to the gym and face my staff, who looked at us as if to say, what stupid bosses do we work for? Because they didn't know the background and all the pieces of the puzzle that led to that, where she'd come through an established employment agency who hadn't done due diligence, and she already had a suspended sentence for fraud. And there was a whole series of machinations that came together to allow for this brokenness, which then became my greatest gift. So at the time, I felt like I was in a dark cave, and I could hardly see. There was a glimmer of light in the corner of the cave. And I literally had to crawl towards that glimmer of light because I had no other choices anymore. And so if my story is powerful from that point of view, it's because, in a way, the fraud was my gift to revisit my past shame and tell my full story, in the hope that it could bring healing and understanding in this country, and in the hope that my story of a pale young girl who, through a series of political awakenings, came to realize the true meaning of our humanity. And so, in a way, that fraud unlocked my body, and my body eventually unlocked my voice, and my voice unlocked my courage, and then my courage seemed to unlock others' courage. And maybe that's why we're sitting here tonight, is because your courage is my courage.
And your courage is my courage. You know, I think when you talked about the very first emotion, which is probably the most difficult of all human emotions, which is that emotion of shame. And which, of course, leads us to that great fear of what other people are thinking. We're so ashamed of who we are. And we know that everyone is looking at us. And everyone is looking down on us. And we are so ashamed of who we are. And when I think about my journey through shame, and it's not that I don't know if I feel shame anymore, but I think at moments I have that moment where I'm like, Mary, but I'm that quick out of it. You know what I mean? I'm that quick into, wait a minute, you badass, you're not, that's not who you are, you know what I mean? But for me, the walk through shame was like, I'd like to say it was a day at a time, but it was sometimes more an hour at a time, a moment at a time. And I began to become aware of this emotion of shame when I was embarrassed and ashamed. And I would, like you, was dumbfounded at how much of my life was lived worrying about what others thought about, when I had to finally say, okay, I live with it 100% of the time. Every single thing I do, I think what others will think before I do it. Oh my gosh. And so if you could just do that, set that aside for an hour. And I've done a whole podcast on this, but I began to put a Post-it note on my mirror every morning that I read that said, what would I do today if I were no longer afraid? And that Post-it note allowed me to walk out of shame. That little tiny Post-it note, when I would just reflect and say, all right, I don't have to solve my life problems, but what about today? And one day at a time. That's how we do it, Alison. One day. So I love this concept of that these struggles, these trials, these ripples in your life, these ups, these downs, sometimes these chasms in your life, are really your greatest gift. And you treasure every one of them. Let's talk about that.
Because they make you go deeper. They make you go deeper into a space where you become somebody you didn't think you could be. And so in the last 6 years, I was always passionate about personal development. But in the last 6 years, morphing into that speaking and writing space, people saw something in my voice that I hadn't yet seen in myself. And sometimes it's when you step into the pain and through the pain, only then can you become a vehicle for other people's pain. And I look back at my life now, and I think of when I was 52, and things were all seemingly going so brilliantly. You know, we'd gone from 3 employees to 150 employees, being featured in television. But deep down, I know that God humbled me in that journey. And I found a different voice and a different way forward. A way forward that made sense of my whole life, made sense of my whole political activism, and why I had the political awakening I did. The why I journeyed with a father who battled severe bipolar, and why it set in pattern a whole pattern of emotional eating, and why his pain when he would drive off, tires squealing into the night, saying, I'm going to kill myself. Why that deepened my compassion and understanding of the struggles that so many people go through. Because bipolar didn't even have a name then in the 1960s. It didn't even have a name. And so, yeah. And so it's like, in a way, writing and speaking has healed me, because writing and speaking has made sense of my whole life. And now my political activism has come full circle in the philanthropic work that I now do, and in the work I do in summits, in entrepreneur summits, women's summits, speaking summits. And it's extraordinary when somehow your life makes sense so that your voice can be a voice for others. And your journey is just a reflection of others' pain so that they can find their courage.
Yes.
And I think that's been my deeper journey.
Alison, I just want to wrap you up I want to just bring you here and sit you next to me and we spend the next 12 hours just being in your safe, peaceful place. Because
It
you
wasn't
truly,
always so. It
oh,
wasn't always so, as
that's
you
why you're
know.
so peaceful now,
Yeah,
is because it wasn't always so.
wasn't
And to be
always.
able to see those things as gifts. I sometimes struggle with women who say to me, well, that's great and fine for you, Mary, at age 71, that you are now in this great peaceful place. I'm in the middle of shit right here at age 50. you know, Life is real for me, and I'm not out yet, and I don't know the way. And so I try and offer them those kind of tidbits that I think that are shining a light on the path. So let's talk about that for just a minute, Alison. We talked about walking out of shame, and we talked about being this light now for others. What would you say to those women who see their shame? They are now kind of in the middle of that journey, but they have no idea who they are without it. Their identity is so mixed up with shame and guilt and this. If they were to walk away and leave that piece behind, they would feel so frightened if I don't even know who I am now without that, because I've been that for so long. How do how do women find, or men as well? This is not just a single sexist problem. This is a joint universal problem. So how do they find then their identity of who they are inside, that beautiful piece that you are showing them and telling them is there, but they don't know how to find it?
For so long, I was my shame. I was my shame. I walked with a stooped back, because my self-esteem, I was carrying the shame of that old identity as part of who I am now. And I think that it wasn't until I stepped out of the arena of being a spectator of personal development and got into the arena of speaking and writing and stepped into the arena as a gladiator and no longer as a spectator or a critic of other people's lives. And that's when the shame started dissipating, because I was claiming a new identity. And every time I stepped into the arena, being on your podcast tonight is stepping into the arena of my voice. And every time I step into the arena, I feel an element of shameless letting go, because in telling my story, I shed another layer of skin of that shame. But what I realized is the gladiator I was facing in the arena was not another speaker, another writer, another book, another person. It was the old identity of who I used to be. And until I stepped into that arena and had the courage to be visible, to be criticized, to be seen. But it was that shifted some of the shame. And I remember there was an incredible podcast by Monica Lewinsky on shame and how she felt when her life, she was walking shame. She was the name that everybody knew. She lived in shame. And so when you hear that podcast, it's deeply evocative for the shame that so many of us cling to. And I look at some things in my life, and I used to be a lot more strident than I am now. I'm a lot more philosophical. I'm a lot more
Yes.
gentle. I'm a lot more
Yes.
peaceful. Because somehow God has stripped the armor off me, and I have no more armor. But with no more armor has come a dissipation of my shame. Because now I am the shame I used to walk. But I let it go every time I step into the arena and tell my story. So I would say to people grappling with shame, find communities that hear your voice, that hear your anguish, that see the little shadow, the glimmer of light in the corner of your cave, and who will you on to crawl towards that light because they know you were born for greater things. You were born to move beyond the shame. You were born to be the messenger of what it's like to emerge from the debris of that anguish so that you can be a light for others. And that's what I wish for people who are still buried in shame. Because when you do rise up, you're rising up not just for yourself. You're rising up for every battered woman. You're rising up for every woman who's lived through anguish, who's lived through what will people think, who's lived through the anguish of body dissociation, the anguish of fighting for a bigger cause. And if you can be the light for them, then you will have given your shame a reason to be and a reason to let go.
So powerful. More powerful words have never been spoken, Alison. You know, I love the analogy that you use of stepping into the arena. And for so many years, I thought that stepping into the arena meant to armor up. I'm going to go out in that arena and I'm going to armor up. I'm going to dress right. I'm going to say the right things. I'm going to be the right person. I'm going to armor up with everything I have in my soul. I'm going to speak with my loud, booming voice, and everyone will fear. And I thought myself, much like, Wonder Woman in her little panties and bustier and her whip, like, ha, this is in the arena. But age has a way of tempering that. And now when I see myself in the arena, I see myself more just standing there in this plain brown robe and just naked. And what would it be like to stand in the arena and drop my robe? Let everyone see every part of me, emotionally, the things I was ashamed of, physically, mentally, my fears socially, all those things that I can let. And I think that you are absolutely right, Alison. That is the journey out of shame. That is who we discover who we are when we're able to stand naked. The very things that we thought we needed to armor up for are the very things that allow us to be free. And they're the things that people now gravitate. People gravitate to you, Alison, not because you're Miss Perfect, because that you've allowed them to see all the wounds, all the scars. You don't stand perfect, scarless, and without wounds. But you stand and allow them to see the wounds, to see the scars, to see where you've healed. That is the beauty you have to offer the world. And yes, it's why people gravitate you and want to read your book. So is that kind of what led you to write your book? Tell me about your book.
I think I knew I had a story in my soul if I just had the courage to tell it. And I just want to backtrack a moment on what you were saying about the confidence and the armor and the getting naked, because it has to do with the book. I used to think confidence was a con. It was a mask that you put on, that donning up the armor. And I know sometimes when I was an entrepreneur, I used to power dress in my business suits to kind of, because I needed that. But now I don't need that anymore. So I often wear soft, gentle dresses because I don't need that armor anymore. But in a way, I believe that because I wrote my book in such a deeply vulnerable way, my confidence has changed to not con as a mask, but confide, dance. Dancing with my audience, dancing with my listeners, and confiding all the scars, all the wounds. And so I want to read you one tiny little excerpt from my book because it is so in this thread. And it's called Stepping into the Light. And it reads, I realize now I am a writer that speaks. That is my true identity. You spoke about identity. How do we find a different identity? Writing chose me. Writing healed me. Now I choose to live a life worth writing for, a life worth writing about. I choose to step into the light. And so I wrote in that spirit. I wrote in the spirit of allowing some 16-year-old girl who felt so alone and wondered if her life would amount to anything. And I wrote my story for all the young people searching for meaning and searching for purpose and thinking that maybe purpose just jumps out of the sky. But sometimes purpose finds us as we find our way. And sometimes we've got to be kinder about how we find our way. And so my journey has been one of only really finding my identity in my 60s. But maybe that was the way God planned my life, so that I could say, don't wait 60 years. Don't wait 60 years to start believing in yourself, to start believing in the power of your message, because your life and your message could change somebody else's life. And so I hope that in my book, I bring some of the lessons of how a pale young girl went over to the other side and learned what it was like to live in apartheid South Africa when you had a different color skin. And that journey shaped my life, and it shaped the work I do now. And so I hope in that from that humbled shame, I can be a voice of healing and hope in this country. And I hope that my message in this country has global relevance.
Yes.
Because of the journey we are all walking.
It definitely has global relevance, Alison. If I know anything, I know this, that the dream of humankind is oneness. and that is my mission for the rest of my life, is to allow people to see that. I am not Black. I did not experience childhood sexual abuse. I did not grow up in the slums of India. But I walked my own path where I knew what it was like to feel alone, to feel different, to feel victimized. I know what it's like to feel ashamed, hopeless. And those emotions allow us to see the oneness in all of us. To be able to say, I see you and I see your pain. Because I've seen me and I've seen mine. In the philanthropic world, and I think you will probably agree with this, Alison, I've worked a lot in the philanthropic world, and I am for everyone who wants to give something and wants to help and wants to support. But I see way too much giving and not enough being. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. People love to give and to be seen giving. And they feel a moral obligation to help those who are less fortunate than them. All of that is wonderful. I have not a problem with it. But you and I both know there's a step beyond that, Alison, where we give so that others can be lifted to where we are. People want to give, but they really don't, as long as you stay in Africa. I mean, I want you to have food and water, but I don't want you to be where I am. I mean, seriously, you couldn't expect that, right? They don't understand that that is the goal, is that we all are living as one. And my husband and I could live very differently. I could spend my life in the Bahamas or wherever else if I did not give. But I give because I want them to be lifted. I see them, and they are me. I see you.
Thank you.
And you are me. I want to read your book, Alison. How do we find it?
Thank you. It's called Belonging, Finding Tribes of Meaning, and it's available on Amazon.
Okay, I'll include that link. Great.
Yeah. And you can follow my journey on LinkedIn through my website, www.alisonweihe.com. And I'm regularly speaking at summits in South Africa. I'm regularly on podcasts. I've been speaking in some US summits. As a result of being on podcasts, people have asked me to then speak at their summits. And like I say, every time it's an honor, because every new voice is a collaborator in this journey of crafting a meaningful life. And tonight, you came on and honored me without armor. And so I hope in my book, I'm honoring those who shaped my journey, shaped my life, and who gave me a calling to make a difference in the world. Yeah.
It is our calling.
Yeah.
It's everyone's calling. You and I, unfortunately, do not have the ability in our single lives to bring about oneness upon our planet. But that great ripple effect, as who hears us, who listens, who is moved, who sees the vision, who understands how they heal themselves, then they can shine a light and heal others. And that is both of our goal in this life. I know that. All right, girlfriend, if you have an opportunity in South Africa where you need a co-speaker call me. I'm flying. I'm there. We'll shine the light bright.
Thank you, Mary.
Oh, my beautiful listeners. I think all of you have seen the journey in me from when I started podcasting 365 episodes ago or something like that, of being just like, always make sure I was funny, always make sure I was loud, and always make sure that I was, I was fun to watch. And now I just kind of sit here and allow wisdom to flow, what I'm meant to speak about, and invite guests who act the same. I don't need Tony Robbins on here screaming at you to get up off your ass. I need people like Alison who just extend an invitation to all of us to get naked, to get in the arena, and not in the arena as an armored up warrior, but in the arena as our authentic self. Alison, I will include everything on the end of this podcast so people can follow you and find you more and buy this book of belonging. Is it on Audible or is it just on paperback, or what is it? What forms?
It's not on Audible yet, but I am speaking to people to get it into Audible in my own voice, because
Yes.
I believe it has to be my naked voice.
I just finished and published my Audible on my book that I published over 3 years ago. And at first I wasn't going to do that either. But then I began to think, I want them to hear my story, my emotion. I want to hear my voice crack when I relive different things. And so I really encourage you to get that out and to be that, because people need to hear this lovely, soft voice that is so incredibly empowered. Thank you for being with us today, Alison, and thanks to all of you who are about taking control of your life and deciding today is your day to live authentically. Today is your day to set aside shame. Today is your day to step into the arena, not armored up with anything more than you. Thanks for being with us. Namaste.
Crafting a meaningful life.